Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Raphael, again, for welcoming us here.
Of course. So I'm going to start us off with some questions, and then we'd love to take some questions from the audience.
And then I will introduce at the end the crew members who are here.
Okay, great. So we have some surprises, too. Oren, can you talk a little bit about what led you to making this film?
Well, I'm a lifetime New Yorker. I grew up here, went to school here, always loved the theater, went to off-Broadway and Broadway plays growing up. I didn't see all the shows that we cover in this, but it was part of sort of the fabric of the world that I lived in New York. But it took, well, we're going to sort of maybe save this to the ending, but thanks to a special guest who's here with us tonight, I discovered that right under my nose there was a story about Broadway that I didn't understand. And that was the story of how really it almost went out of business. I mean, we don't go into, there isn't time in this film to tell all the detail of how bad things were in 1972, but it was really bad. They couldn't make payroll. People were telling stories that, maybe we should tear down all these theaters and turn them into parking lots so there's places for people to park and go to the office buildings in Midtown. So it was really, and the story of the comeback of Broadway and of New York were so deeply entwined. And it was a story that I didn't realize was right under my nose. And then when we found that, then we decided to make the movie.
Well, thank you for making this film, because I'm also a fan of Broadway and theater, and I learned a lot in this film, because I think it's a story none of us really think about. We show up, it's glossy, Times Square, there's plays, but there is a very rich history with a lot of ups and downs and precarious moments that we take for granted.
Well, one of the fortunate surprises is that we started to tell the story, and I love to do films where there are multiple levels, where you're not just telling the sort of obvious, first level story of this is that, okay, things were down and they got better and New York improved and the theater got more successful and they were losing money and then they made money. That's the sort of obvious story. But beneath that were two other really surprising stories that I learned in the course of making it. The first was that Broadway, in this period, one of the biggest changes, apart from its growing success, is that it became much more a reflection of our society. It became diverse and started to represent diverse artists on its stages. The writers, the actors, the designers, the producers, the directors have been more and more, from whether it's racial diversity, ethnic diversity, sexual preference, as we show in this film, gender, identity, all these things. Broadway has made a point of doing this and has done it at the same time that it's become a commercial bonanza. So it's like, there's this corollary that's surprising. And the other surprising thing that we learned, and that I think you sort of get a sense of in the film, although no one says it explicitly, is that all of the big hit shows that really turned the corner, that made these advances, that kept making it more successful and kept growing the audience. I always thought, oh, well, these big hit shows, they're audience-pleasing entertainments. But when you look at each one of them, whether it's Chorus Line, even Cats, Hamilton, all of them, they were really experimental, risk-taking endeavors, whereas some artist had an innovative approach that changed things, and there were producers and theater owners who were willing to back that up and take the risk to go with them. So there's a risk-taking, is sort of the number one value in a way that came out to me of what the essence of a lot of the story was.
And I was amazed that the NAP actually let you film, because it's already so nerve-wracking putting on a new show, knowing the statistics and odds are against you, and they're also obviously pushing the envelope with the characters they're exploring and the plot and snooker. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how you got them to say yes.
Well, they were very, very open. I mean, partly, I'll introduce later, one of our executive producers introduced me to Lynn Meadow, and that didn't hurt. But it was important to us. Lynn has been somebody who's been around this whole period. And from the beginning of the story to the end, she's been running a theater in New York, which is kind of an extraordinary thing. And they started off as an off-Broadway theater, but now they're a major Broadway theater. But it was important to us that, as you're going through the film, it's sort of catapulting you through time. And we thought it's important to stop the story occasionally to let people settle down and experience what really is a Broadway show. What is the process, just to get a feel and to breathe it and to have access to something you don't usually get to see. And we wanted to tell a story that related to that theater, both because Lynn Meadow, as a woman, is an important pioneer on Broadway. Now there are many more women. When she started, she was one of the only ones. And because the nonprofit theaters, as you saw, was a big part of the story of how Broadway right of the ship. And then the story that there was a transgender character in the first season on Broadway, where there were transgender characters on Broadway, was also, made it very appealing to us to be there.
Let's take some questions from the audience. New Yorkers are always very curious. Right here, and I'll repeat the question for everybody. So the question is the NAP still running, and is that the only show they followed, or did they luck out?
It's not still running because it was part of the season of the Manhattan Theater Club, which is a repertory. Even though they have Broadway House, they run a repertory and they do, multiple plays in a season, and they have to empty that theater to put in their next play. So the play that's in that theater now is another wonderful English play, The Height of the Storm, with Eileen Atkins and Jonathan Pryce, and definitely worth going. But what was the other part of your question? We didn't follow what I don't want to go into sort of the legal and monetary complications of making this film because we'd be here all night, but rested enough to say that it's very, very, very expensive to set your foot inside the rehearsal room of a Broadway theater. And so to do more than one film in this film, we couldn't have done anything else. But that would be a good film.
Right here in the middle. So the question is, why does Oren think there's still so few women directors and writers on Broadway?
Why are there so few women running Fortune 500 companies? Why are there so few women directing Hollywood movies? Why are there so few women in all the positions that they should hold equally? Because we're at the beginning of a revolution. We're beginning of a moment where women are taking their fair place in society, which they were denied, until our generation. It's beginning to change. And that's one of the stories I think you see in this film, is you see a beginning of a change. And you just see, why aren't there more black directors on Broadway? Why aren't there more black playwrights? Well, there are getting to be a lot more. When the story in this film started, there were none. Now that, well, you should actually, that's really not true totally. If you look at the Tony winner this year, directed by a woman, written by a woman. The Tony play, was it last season? When Indecent won, that was written by a woman, directed by a woman. So it's getting to be more and more. The big successes are being done by women, and audiences are responding to that. Not to say that that's enough.
Yes, sir. So in the 70s, there were a lot of plays about labor, and it's been lost in the decades since, and what could be done to bring some of that back?
I can't really be I would love to answer your question. I can't really be a spokesman for Broadway. I'm a documentarian who's observing Broadway. Same with your question. I'd love to defend Broadway or, speak up for Broadway, but it's not my role. I'm here to, I documented this story. I think labor, that's one of the sad things in our society. The labor movement used to be the core of, the left, political conscience of this country for, my parents' generation when I was a young man, and people have forgotten about labor, and labor in many ways is being neglected as an important force in progressive politics, and that's through the whole society, and I think all I can say is Broadway reflects society, for better or worse. And it comes back to the women question too. It's like it reflects the society in the ways that society is getting better and in the way that society isn't getting better. I think it's reflected in the commercial realities of Broadway.
And I have a personal question for you.
Yeah.
Do you remember the first Broadway show you saw, or the first one that just knocked your socks off?
Well, let me start with the first one that made me want to work in the theater. When I was a teenager, I saw Athol Fugard's play that he wrote with John Connie and Winston Nashona, two South African black men, about their lives, based on their lives, and based on there was a play called Sizwe Banzi is Dead and The Island, and they were 2 acts. And they brought the reality of life in South Africa and apartheid to Americans at a time when we didn't really understand it or know about it. And that showed me that art can really, move people and change things and have a political power. And these were both kind of documentary plays. They were plays that were based on realities that these men had lived. One of them was about just living with the past system under apartheid. And the other was about 2 prisoners in Robben Island where Mandela was kept, who had to put on a play. And it was based on the real experiences of these 2 actors, and they wrote it with Fugard. And that made me want to work in the theater, and then I ended up going to drama school and working with Athol Fugard. So that was a very important Broadway experience. I think the first thing I saw, I don't know if this doesn't really count as Broadway, but it was the first Broadway show. My mother brought me to City Center to see Finian's Rainbow.
Okay.
It was a revival. I think that was the first thing.
All the way in the last row. I'll just repeat it quickly. So the question is around a lot of the people interviewed are non-Americans, and is there a reason why there weren't more American Broadway greats?
Actually, I don't think that's true. I think there's an even balance of Americans and people from various foreign countries. I mean, 2 of the biggest stars are British, and James Corden, I guess, is also British. Hugh Jackman is Australian. Christine Baranski, John Lithgow, Alec Baldwin, Viola Davis, who? Hal Prince. Well, we did try to get many of the Broadway legends, and some people didn't want to be in the film. We asked lots of people, and we got some great storytellers. And we were focusing on people who could cover the whole experience as much as possible. We started with actors who we knew had stories to tell all the way through. We wanted a few storytellers, as I think really works well in a documentary.
I loved the range and the inclusion of the Sardi's Mater D.
Thank you.
So.
And we also wanted, there are a lot of great producers who don't, often get the limelight. Someone like Manny Eisenberg, who, produced some of the original first Neil Simon comedies before this period that we cover even started, all the way to being a producer on Hamilton. So we tried again to look for this range of coverage, or someone like Elizabeth McCann, who's still producing and started out producing in the 60s.
So we're down to the last question, but I know you had some special thank yous and a special.
So thank you, Raphael. And I'd like to thank the generous philanthropic donors who made this film possible. A number of people are here tonight from among the 40 individuals, foundations, and other entities who funded us. And you have our heartfelt gratitude, and thank you for coming to see it tonight. But I'd also like to acknowledge a few of the wonderful filmmakers with us in the audience who we're fortunate to have on the On-Broadway team. So I'll do this. You could stand up if you are not too shy. Co-producer Sam Janishian. Editors Ted Raviv and Stephen Wetzler. Directors of photography Buddy Squires and Tom Hurwitz. Original music Joe Goodman in the back row. Associate producer, archival researcher Hugo Lau. Assistant editor Jen Ackerman. Sound recordist Eddie O'Connor. Production assistant Brooke Bassin. Colorist Ken Cerulnik. Sound designer Margaret Crimmins. Music sound mixer Greg Smith. Music supervisor Ian Herbert. Interviewees who are with us, and I hope I don't leave anybody out. If you're here and I don't mention your name in your interview, please stand up. Jeremy Gerard, Albert Poland, and John Brelio, who is also an executive producer and important advisor on the film. I'd like to thank Steve Cowes from the Manhattan Theater Club for his wisdom, support, and exceptional counsel. A special thanks to George Cohen. And I'd like to thank Betsy West, my wife, a great audience member, soulmate, and an EP on Broadway. But most important of all, I'd like to say a few words and introduce someone special. Films like this only get made with a lot of goodwill, generosity, good luck, and steely determination. The good luck on this film began when my friend Vicki Gordon, who's also here, introduced me to the remarkable Pat Schoenfeld. Pat had the idea to make a film about Broadway's recent history and has been a driving force and inspiration through the whole process. I couldn't have asked for a better partner. I'm just going to give Pat the mic a minute to say a final thought to send us on our way. Maybe tell us why you wanted the film made, Pat.
Now, I really, I felt that there were so many books about the history of the theater, and some of them were terrific books, others that just didn't make any sense at all. But there were no recordings, and now that we have a recording, I am satisfied. And it's a wonderful, I think it's a wonderful piece. And Oren and I just met at a cocktail party, and I just said, "Come home with me," and he did, and we have been really, really wonderful friends, wonderful partners, and I am so happy with the film. Thank you.
I mean, thank you, Pat. I mean, it's been such a pleasure and an honor for me, and delightful surprise making this film, that Pat, who dare I say is 90 years young, and lived this whole history up close from inside the theaters, going to all these shows, knowing a lot of the people who were in the film. And we somehow wanted to tell the same story. It's like I kept thinking, well, we're going to butt heads over this or that, but we were covering what happened, and it's been a wonderful, wonderful partnership. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Doc NYC.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rafaela.
So don't forget to vote for the Audience Award, and you are the first New York City audience to see this film. We had such demand for it. We have an extra screening that was added tomorrow at 12:40 p.m. So if you want to even come back and see it again, come join us. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you, Oren.
Thank you.